All right, let's just dive right in. What if I told you that everything you think is so important, your career, your goals, your whole life, was all just happening on an invisible, totally non-existent speck of dust? That's the really provocative starting point for the idea we're exploring today: infinite, timeless consciousness.
So the philosophy we're getting into today, wow, it does not pull any punches. It just opens right up with this challenge. Think beyond your death. I mean, right away, it's asking us to consider that maybe everything we're working so hard for on this invisible dust particle is, well, meaningless. It's a pretty jarring thought for sure, but you got to stick with it because it's absolutely central to everything that comes next.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we've got to completely change our perspective. We need to zoom out, like way, way out.
And this right here, this is the main metaphor we're going to keep circling back to. The idea that our whole world, literally everything we see and feel and do, is just an invisible, non-existent dust particle. It's meant to be humbling, kind of disorienting even. And honestly, it's the bedrock of this entire way of thinking. So, okay, if our world is just a speck of dust, what does that make us? Well, according to this view, our physical body, what the text calls the minuscule, momentary preacher, is just this impossibly tiny fraction of what you really are. The rest of you, the other 99 point a whole bunch of 9%, that's your true self. That's the infinite, timeless awareness. And this brings us right to the core problem, the absolute heart of this whole philosophy. It argues that the source of all our suffering, all of it, comes down to one single thing: a huge case of mistaken identity. And here it is. They call it the great misidentification. The basic idea is that our true self, this massive, timeless awareness, has completely forgotten what it is. It's mistakenly started to think it's just this temporary physical body. It's like if the entire ocean somehow convinced itself that it was nothing more than a single tiny wave that's here one second and gone the next. Now, this is a pretty radical claim, right? The text argues that the whole problem, we're talking all suffering, all anxiety, it isn't caused by your job or your relationships or anything external at all. Nope. It says it all comes from this one internal mistake, our infinite awareness identifying with this minuscule creature. And think about what that means. It means every fear you have, every little bit of anxiety, it all just comes from trying to protect this tiny temporary self. We get so wrapped up in keeping the creature safe that we totally forget our true nature is this huge eternal awareness that, well, can't actually be harmed in the first place. Which leads us to a kind of fork in the road. This philosophy says there are basically two completely different realities, and we get to choose which one we live in at any given moment. So you've got the delusional reality over here. That's our everyday world, right? Full of problems, deadlines, drama, all happening on that little dust particle. And then you have the actual reality, the reality of the infinite, timeless cosmos. And the argument here is that we spend pretty much all of our time completely lost in the delusion. And just look at the difference here. The delusional reality, it's all about time, somethingness, constant disturbance, the ego. But the actual reality, it's the total opposite. Timelessness, nothingness, stillness, and ultimately liberation from all that chaos. Okay, so if we're living in the wrong reality, the big question is, how do we get to the right one? Well, the text offers a path, and it calls it, pretty poetically, the art of disappearing.
And this is a really important distinction to make. So much of modern self-help is about building a bigger ego, a better you. This philosophy, it goes in the complete opposite direction. The goal isn't to become a better version of the creature. The goal is to dissolve the creature's grip on your awareness altogether.
So, how do you do it? The path to liberation is laid out as a process. First, you have to consciously practice disidentifying from that temporary creature. Then, you have the realization, oh, my true self is this infinite awareness. And finally, you disappear. You let that whole idea of a separate self just dissolve and merge back into the infinite. Now, let's be super clear here. Disappearing is a metaphor. This has nothing to do with physical death. It's about letting the idea of a separate you just fade away. The whole goal is to let your awareness return to its natural state, which is being merged with the infinite, timeless whole. And that brings us right back to where we started, with a choice. See, this philosophy isn't just about cool ideas. It leaves you with a really direct question. Now that you've seen these two realities, the chaotic, turbulent life on the dust particle on one hand, and the absolute stillness of the cosmos on the other, the only question left is, which one are you going to choose to live in?